Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me for another episode in the Conversation with Alan series. I'm Alan Locher, and I'm the child of two Holocaust survivors. I created this series to have honest discussions about the rise of anti-Semitism and hate with high hopes that it leads to conversations that make us all think about our own place in shaping history and to inspire collective action to eradicate hate in all its forms. Conversations like this are more crucial now than ever in the face of rising anti-Semitism worldwide. Joining me this evening from Brisbane, Australia, is award-winning writer Heather Morris, who will tell us about her New York Times bestselling book, The Tattooist of Auschwitz, which has sold 13 million copies worldwide since its release in 2018, and the Peacock series of the same name that premiered back in May earlier this year. Heather first met Lale Sokolov 21 years ago, shortly after his wife had passed away. Heather was told by a friend that Lale had a story worth telling, leading to many days spent with the Tattooist of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Lale's life was forever changed the day he looked into the eyes of a young girl as he tattooed her left arm and she tattooed her love into his heart. What Heather received from Lale was a love story set against the backdrop of the Holocaust. The possibility of survival for these two lovers was slim, but these two prisoners did survive. They endured a place etched in history as a Dante-esque circle of hell, survived a death march, were separated and reunited, married, and lived happily for 58 years in Melbourne, Australia. The Tattooist of Auschwitz is a story of Lale and Gita. It is my pleasure to welcome Heather Morris to Conversations with Alan. Hi, Heather.
Hello, Alan. It's wonderful to be here talking with you and to the folks who will tune in.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful you would take the time. I did not read the book. I would love to at this point, but the mini-series on Peacock was an incredible telling of this story. So, and thank you for getting it made. I know it was a dream of yours and Lale that you shared. What do you think he would have thought of the series?
Look, I think he would have been delighted. He would have been particularly delighted because anybody who has seen the series but also read the book would be saying, hang on a sec, it's different. The difference is not in the storytelling of his Holocaust period of time, but the fact that we incorporated him as that beautiful old man that I knew. That Harvey Keitel played Lale as this late 80s, 90-year-old man.
Harvey was incredible.
Isn't he? Oh, yeah, he was brilliant. People are saying that this, in fact, is possibly the best thing he's ever done, and he's done a lot of work. That includes very close family members who've made that statement. Of his, not mine.
Oh, wow. Okay. But you think Lale would be happy with how it turned out?
Oh, absolutely. Lale was a very flamboyant and, very charismatic and charming. And I think when I've been asked about, what would it be like for him right now? I said, for me, it would be very different. Because if I was to be talking with you right now and he was beside me, then I wouldn't be getting a word in. He would have wanted to dominate all the publicity and marketing, and he would have been, out there front and center.
And he would have deserved it too.
He would have. And I guess the telling thing is that he and Gita's son, Gary, has overwhelmingly, praised this telling of his parents' story. Mm-hmm. I got to sit with Gary back in March before it was released in a studio. Well, it was in a small theatre in Melbourne with the producer and executive producers. They flew down to Melbourne from the UK, and over 2 days, he and I, and then we watched the whole 6 episodes. I tell you, every finger in this hand got broken as he crushed them. After every episode, I had to virtually change my top. He sobbed so much.
You're gonna make me sob, but I can't imagine, watching my parents' story unfold, knowing what they endured. The fact that he was even alive to watch it is a miracle, really.
Exactly. And that was one of the other things, that not only was the miniseries something that he had to watch, but you're seeing it played out there. The poor man, he learned so much about his parents reading the manuscript of my book, pre-publication, because they never spoke to him about that. And I understand that. I get that. Hang on a sec. I silenced my phone. What's going on?
Oh, you did, and it's still ringing. Uh-oh. Lale's calling.
No, it's my daughter.
Wow. So wow. Well, I am a big fan of Melanie Lynskey, who played you.
Oh, yeah.
What did you think?
Oh, look, she's so charming. And as she admitted to me the first time we met, and she'd been watching apparently a lot of interviews I'd done and seen recordings of me. And first thing she said to me was, "I'm nothing like you." I said, "Oh, good." Because that way you won't try and interpret me. And so we had lots of long conversations about the best way that she could portray my character. I said, "Please, you just play your version of me. I don't want you playing me. It's awkward enough for me as it is here." But she was lovely. We've got a lot in common. We're both Kiwis. So we could talk about the All Blacks and things back home. But I met her for the first time, of course, in Slovakia. She was there to begin filming in a few days. And
wow. What was it like for you watching them relive your story with Lale?
Yeah, look, initially when particularly for the first, because we were seeing some rushes or the outtakes being sent to me, and whenever Melanie was on the screen, I averted my eyes. And after a while, I suddenly realized, hang on a minute, that's actually not me. That's a character playing somebody who has my same name. And I was able then to watch the performance and watch her interactions with Harvey and just get caught up in the emotion of it all. It wasn't easy because I'd given the producers and the scriptwriter clear instructions that at no point must the story ever be determined or in any way look like it's mine. It's not my story. And so, to their credit and with my insistence, they kind of made her like the backdrop for Harvey. I said, I don't want my character to be front and center at any point in time.
Wow.
And so that probably made it harder for Melanie because she probably wanted to get her teeth into it. But she's been told to hold it back because not my story, Alan, not my story.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, that was what, was so interesting to me watching it and unfold. I worked here in the United States for an Australian company, and a colleague had recommended the book, and I had put it on a list, and I just never got to it. But then, I'm watching the series, and as the story's unfolding, and to learn that you didn't know each other, and it was like two strangers coming together was fascinating. And then looking you up online and finding you, I really wanted to speak to you about this because I think it's just such a you made a connection with him, and for him to open up and share such a personal, harrowing, loving story that will live on.
Look, in your introduction, Alan, you said that I spent many hours with him. It wasn't hours, it was years. Wow. And that was why I agreed to having the miniseries told, having him, old Lale and myself feature in it. It gave the makers of the miniseries an opportunity to do something I couldn't do in the book. And that was to show the fallibility of memory. And it was to show how when Lale first, within the first, I suppose, year, he's telling me all these vignettes and his story of being in Auschwitz-Birkenau. But about a year or so later, when he's looking at drafts of the screenplay, because I actually wrote this thing as a screenplay, I always saw it being played out on a screen, and so did he. Now, big or small, we didn't care.
I was going to ask you that. I was surprised to hear that it was. I mean, when you talk about over 13 million books, and you were going to start as just the screenplay, that's amazing.
Yes, but it would be sort of a year or two down the track when he'd read something and he'd drop his head and he said, "Can I tell you what really happened?" And so there were many stories, the really, really painful ones, the really, really traumatic ones, that he gave me a version of that initially as he was getting to know me. That it wasn't that it was not true, but it was downplayed, and his part in some things. And I guess it's a classic case of, we never want to show ourselves off in a bad light. And the whole thing about memory, how we remember, what we choose to remember, and with Lale, it was a matter of, this is how I wanted it to be. This is how I wanted that to play out, and it didn't. And then 12 months later, I'm hearing this is how it really was. This is what really happened. That's why we have several of those scenes where you see Lale saying something to Melanie. It plays out, and you come back to him, and then it plays out again how it really was.
And him almost also avoiding looking at the screenplay. Because I'm sure, I can't even imagine the pain the memories bring.
Yes, but the funny thing about that, because I didn't know how to write a book. Sometimes I'm not convinced I do yet. But I went and learned. I said, do a couple of courses online on how to write a screenplay, and how about I write it that way? And so he agreed to that because he thought that was wonderful. And then he worked out exactly what was behind that when I showed him a draft of the screenplay the first time. And he got totally caught up with, well, who will play me? Well, I don't know, Lale. He said, I'm a good-looking boy. Brad Pitt's a good-looking boy. You get me Brad Pitt. So we had this incredible many, many months where he and I went to every new release movie trying to find the perfect person to play Lale Sokolov.
That's amazing.
It was hilarious.
That is amazing.
Somebody else, somebody would come on the screen. I'd say, that's him. And he'd very loudly proclaim, what are you thinking? He looks nothing like me. And I go, yeah, he's 27, you're 90. Of course he doesn't. But it was a hilarious part of our time together.
That is fantastic. I love that. Going back before you ever met him, what was your knowledge of, the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, all of that? Like, were you from, I'm sure you knew about it. We all know about things, but.
Yeah. I'd heard the word Holocaust. I'd read Anne Frank's diary when I was at school, and that was it. Wow. My small town New Zealand education had taught me nothing. If it got mentioned, I don't think it even got mentioned there. I would have heard about it or read about it somewhere because I was a big Encyclopedia Britannica reader growing up. But it was embarrassing and humiliating to have to admit to him how little I knew. Wow. And to him, actually, he just nodded his head and he went, that's okay, because I will teach you. And you'll be the perfect person to tell my story because you do not have any baggage of your own. You do not have your own baggage.
I know that was an important element to the person who would tell his story, that they didn't want them to be Jewish, correct?
Yes, very much so.
Wow.
He'd rejected people who his son had brought to him. As you said, that when Gita had died, he'd asked his son to find somebody he could talk to and tell his story. Gary had brought several people to meet him. They were people that he knew. And one of them, I think, was even a journalist with the Jewish News in Melbourne. But he was saying, no. And it was just a casual coffee I had with a friend who she said, do you want to meet this man? He's got a story. And I said, yes. There's a lesson in there, isn't it? Don't say no to things if you've got no good reason not to. Say yes, folks.
Yes. It really is. I'm so glad you said that, Heather, because it is so true to say yes. And what did you learn from that friend before you first knocked on his door? Like, did you know that it was about surviving Auschwitz and that part of it?
I knew he was a Holocaust survivor, and that was it. The word tattooist, or in Lale's words he used, he was the Tätowierer. He always said I was a Tätowierer, the German word for tattooist. And he never said that he tattooed either. So that was interesting when I'm trying to write this story, and I've got to remember, I've got to now use words that readers are going to understand, not the words that Lale used for me, because he said that he was the Tätowierer and he made the numbers. He didn't tattoo, he made the numbers. So there was always that underpinning every time I wrote it, making sure that I rephrased it. But yes, that was all I knew. And the first time I met him, it was one of those weird meetings. I knocked on his door and he opened the door, and he was maybe 5'2", 5'3". Look, I'm only 5'6", so I'm not as if like I towered over him. But he had two dogs, one either side of him. They were Tootsie and Bam Bam. Yeah.
Great names.
Tootsie was the size of a small pony, and Bam Bam was smaller than my cat. But he just opened the door and said, "Come," and turned around, and he and the dogs walked away. And I walked into, followed him into this room, and he pointed to the dining table and to a chair, and he said, "Sit." So I sat, and he and the doggies then disappeared again. He called them doggies, kiddos or doggies. And he came back, and I still sat there looking around, not knowing what to do next. The next thing, he comes back, and he's got a cup of very lukewarm, weak coffee. He didn't ask me if I wanted anything. and a plate with half a dozen wafer biscuits on it. And he put those down in front of me. And every time for the next 3 years that I went to his house, I had to drink his terrible coffee. I didn't mind the wafer biscuits.
Here's a great photo of you too.
Oh my gosh, I love him. I'll miss you, honey.
I mean, looking at, this photo of Lale, Harvey, really, the makeup was perfect. A
little bit of prosthetics in there and some makeup, but you're right.
Yeah, he really did. You never actually interviewed Lale. You say that for like the first 3 months, I think you didn't even take pen and paper. How did you get him to start opening up and?
No, look, it wasn't only 3 months. I never ever went there with a recording device or pen and paper in front of him. Just didn't do it. If you want somebody to talk to you, then you've got to shut up and listen. Look, I knew that from where I worked in a big hospital in social work, when you're dealing with somebody who's, for me, they were in an acute phase of trauma or tragedy, that you need to actively listen to them. And if you start writing things down in front of them, you will find they'll get distracted and they'll want to see what it is you're writing. Or if you've got a recorder on, they're going to watch every word they say, because it's now being recorded for all times. So I knew that you just didn't do that. If you wanted to get something from somebody, you want them to open up. So by actively listening, you're hearing the words, you're seeing their faces, you're reading their body language, and you can interpret what's going on internally with them a lot better than if you had your head down. I wouldn't have seen the distress that was happening to him, which did, all the time. To the point where I needed to calm him down and bring him out from that place back in 1943 that he had gone. So no, you just shut up and listen, folks. That's the other way to get a story.
Well, you mentioned how Gary brought other potential folks to meet with him, but you really, coming from that background, that's a skill that really probably helped so much in getting the story that you actually got from Lale.
Yes, and look, not only him, but from the two of the surviving beautiful three sisters that I subsequently wrote the third novel about. Yes, and look, I credit my great-grandfather with that. I grew up on a farm in New Zealand, and my great-grandfather lived 2 paddocks away. And I would stop off from school every afternoon to check on him and my great-grandmother. These are my great-grandparents, not my grandparents. And most afternoons I'd sit out on the veranda with this beautiful old man well into his 80s. And we'd just sit there and he'd talk, and sometimes we wouldn't talk. And then he'd just say, "What can you hear, girlie?" I think he knew my name, but I don't ever recall him using it. Another one who called me girlie. I had 4 brothers, so I was the only girl. Maybe that's what it was. And if I ever said nothing to him, he would growl at me. He said, "You're not listening." So then I would say, "Oh, okay, I can hear a bird." "Well, what is that bird?" "Oh, okay, I can hear a tractor somewhere." "Well, whose tractor is it?" "Oh, I don't know, because I can't see it, but it's one of the neighbouring farmers' tractors." I said, "Oh, it's missing a beat." He said, Yep. No, Vic Harper needs to change a couple of these spark plugs." And so this whole thing, this beautiful old man taught me that if you listen, actively listen, you will hear the world around you.
So important. Just as the yes that you said, say yes, listening is really the greatest gift we have, really, to listen to others. Yeah. Were you prepared for the types of stories that he was going to share? Because you didn't.
Not in the slightest. By the way, the other thing I had to tell him on that first day we met, when I realized after I'd worked out who he was in terms of being this person actively involved in Auschwitz-Birkenau for those years, I finally said, I think there's something I need to tell you before we go any further. And I think it was probably the first time he lifted his head up and looked at me. I said, and you need to know my mother's maiden name. And he was perplexed, and he said, why? I said, I want you to know my mother's maiden name. He said, what is it? I said, it's Schwarzfeger. And he went, you're German? And I said, no, I'm a good Kiwi girl. And at that point he went, and that was the point actually that I knew, Alan, that he was somebody who had the horrible, horrible, evil period of history pass through his life, and he still didn't judge others, because his comeback to that was, what does it matter? We can't choose our parents. We can't choose anything that gives us life. Yeah, and the whole sins of the father thing for him just didn't exist. If anyone, he and the Holocaust survivors, I mean, they were entitled to hold grudges, trust me. Well, I thought they were.
I know. I mean, my mother wouldn't have gotten in a German car.
Yeah.
Till the day she died, really. She would not, wouldn't want her kids going to Germany, even though we did. Yes. But, yeah. And it's understandable. And I probably didn't understand it to the degree I understand it today, just the mental state that they are left in, really. Like, unfortunately, I mentioned the 80-year-old Holocaust survivor I interviewed. She is now going to therapy, and she berates herself for being so stubborn for many years when her children had been trying. But, we didn't have mental health back, after the war that would have helped Lale and Gita and my parents and all the other Holocaust survivors to deal with that trauma.
No, there was nothing. I think the phrase post-traumatic stress hadn't been invented at that point. I had my family in New Zealand. We had family members of my uncles, etc., who came back from the Second World War, either from the Pacific or from Europe. And growing up as kids, we were just told that, be careful of Mr. Finn, be quiet around him. He suffers from shell shock. So my family used that phrase, which to us just meant, okay, they've had a rough time.
Right. But, yeah.
There was never any help for them.
No. And I mean, if there was a group of people who needed it, it was Holocaust survivors, for sure.
I had this incredible message sent to me from a friend, and she sent me the exact text because it came to her as a text from a friend of hers that I don't know. And it was just after the miniseries came out, and she wrote saying that she and her father had just watched and binged the one night, the entire miniseries, with her 98-year-old grandfather. And she said, for the first time in all his life, he started talking when it finished. We are all sobbing, and he won't stop talking. And said, send her thanks to me for giving this man, now at the age of 98, permission. He felt that he now had permission to tell his family about his story. Wow. That's pretty special.
That really is, because we don't know how much time he has left at that age. And that is a gift for sure. I know that there's, in the series, in the book, there's such difficult stories that Lale is sharing with you. You say you went out of your way to protect him and try to sort of change, steer him in a different direction before you left. Can you talk about that a little?
Look, I guess it also helped that I worked in, as I say, in a hospital in the social work department. I had access to the senior psychiatrists in that hospital, who I often went to, a friend of mine there, and said, look, I'm talking to this beautiful old man. Can you just guide me to make sure that I'm not doing him any harm? how can I protect him from himself? And I remember his first phrase was, hang on, first of all, you've got to protect yourself. And I said, yes, I know the whole thing about transference. We knew, of course, working with people who are suffering something tragic or traumatic, that when they talk, that pain and trauma can leave them and land on the shoulders of you if you let it. And while I deal with acute people, I knew how to deal with that. But with Lale, I'm now dealing with historical trauma and pain and, yes, guilt. And that was a different kettle of fish. So I had this dual role, protect myself, which was the only way I could then protect him. Of course, there were many times I didn't. It broke down with me and it broke down with him. But with the help of my family, who would see that something was wrong, because Lale became part of our lives. But whenever I came home from being with him, and they would say, how's Lale? How was Lale today? If I said the words, he's fine, and walked away, then they'd all look at each other and go, uh-oh, we need to have a talk with Mum.
Wow.
Okay, something's got to you here. Now you've got to realise what's happened, because I didn't half the time, but I didn't want to talk about it. But when I felt that what he was sharing with me was making a difference to him, but I wasn't in any way trying to own it, well, then I would openly talk to others about what he was saying. So there was these 3 years of a good juggle of, but you're quite right in terms of, I had to be aware of the times, and there were so many, Alan, when he'd be talking to me and he's only 3 feet away, and all of a sudden I'd see his eyes move and they'd go past me. And then I'd hear the tremor in his voice, and I'd look down at his hands and they'd be shaking. And I knew that he's now gone back to that terrible time. He is no longer in that room with me. And I just watch him carefully, maybe 5 minutes, 10 at the most, before I'd then reach out and stroke his arm and just say something to bring him back to me. But then again, at the end of whenever I was going home, there was always a good 15, 20 minutes of talking about sport, talking about my teenage daughter that was giving me a hard time, and he just loved that. And yeah, you would then talk about present day and what was going on. And I always left him, absolutely in a fabulous place, dancing around the room with his doggies, particularly the big one, who he liked to pick up her front legs and dance with. And
I think Harvey, many times in the series, you could see the eyes go off.
Yeah.
I think that was well conveyed there. You said, you started out, this was a screenplay. I think, was it your sister-in-law who suggested the book?
Yes, in San Diego. Yeah.
I'm going there tomorrow.
I love San Diego. I was there earlier this year. Twice this year I've been there already. But I think she was tired of me complaining about those buggers 100 miles up the road in Hollywood who didn't know a decent story if it hit them over the head. And she just looked at me and went, for goodness sake, write the bloody thing as a book and get on with it. Well, okay, then I'll give it a go.
And what was that process like for you? Like, how did you take the screenplay you had and start writing a book that has sold 13 million copies?
Yes. Well, my first challenge was going to be, I'm not going to write this if no one's going to publish it. You can see I'm getting long in the tooth. I'm no spring chicken anymore. And I was being told, you write the manuscript and then you send a query letter to some publishers and you wait for them to ask to see the manuscript. I went, I ain't got time for that. One of my sons, he's still in the film business here in Australia. Now, he had done several years ago a crowdfunding thing on Kickstarter, Amazon's Kickstarter. And he said to me, listen, Mum, he said, why don't you do a Kickstarter campaign? He said, I know you don't want it because of money. He wanted it for the money, he and his partner, for filming. He said, just a little bit. He said, but what had happened to them in doing that Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign was, he said, the whole world knew about our project. So I sat down, the hubby put a camera in front of me and made this little 3-minute sort of promo. I plagiarised some music, plagiarised some shots from the Holocaust, and threw that up on Kickstarter. I've got to stop waving my hands around, don't I? Very distracting, I know. But here was the thing, Ellen. I did that and publishers came to me. So I still do not have a query letter. I mean, a rejection letter anyway. So when I settled on one and they wanted to get a ghostwriter, oh, well, look, I said, look, I've got this screenplay and it's really, really good. And I went, yes, well, we'll get a ghostwriter to work with you. And I went, oh, please. Well, have a crack. I think, and then initially she said to me, my publisher, look, this should be a memoir. You write it as a memoir. Then my brain goes, I don't know how to do that. I found a course in memoir writing. It was a 5-day course. I went for 1 day. I came back and I wrote to her and I said, no, that's not going to work for me. I can't tell his story under the restriction I have already learnt in day one. And so she, brilliant, brave Kate Parkin said, why don't you just tell the story the way you want it? My said brother and sister-in-law in San Diego happened to have a holiday house up on Lake Big Bear. And so in the middle of your winter, me and 2 squirrels for a month, I sat there and I had the screenplay or the script that I'd written, and I had my computer and I just said, okay, scene 1. And I just went, okay, and I tried to then write it, not in script format. The first few takes or chapters I sent to the publisher to have a look at said, I've never had an author write to me, and then the one sentence go from the first person to the third person. Oh, let's go back to the first and let's end up in the second. So that was hilarious, as I had to learn how to write while doing it, this book. But we did it, and she, look, to their credit, they said, in the end, you just write it the way you want. I said, I'm going to write it the way Lale told me. And they went, that'll do it.
What has surprised you most, when the book came out, the success of the book? Has there been something that has surprised you the most about sharing the story?
Yes. Didn't see that coming. It was only going to be published in Australia, a small little Australian publishing company that I went with. I went with them because they were local, and I thought, I can have that interaction with them. But I did not know at that time that their parent company actually was in London and a even bigger mob in Sweden. And so for me, I had to honour why I kept going with this and why I had that screenplay that I was pushing for all those years. Lale had a stroke 3 days after he turned 90. I was with him on his 90th birthday. And I got a call 3 days later from his son to say that he was in hospital and that he'd had a massive stroke. And Gary, to his credit, said to me, I only want you to see him. You've been the most significant person in my father's life since my mother died. Could you go and spend time with him? I want to go home and have a shower and just have some time away. And of course I said yes. And I was sitting with him for a couple of hours and I got to do all the talking. And I joked with him about that. And I would, anytime you want a button here, Lale, please, feel free. But I know that might sound crass to some people that I'm with a man, no longer with us really, but it was an incredible 2 hours. And when I was told that I had to go by the medical staff and I kissed them goodbye for the last time, the last words I said to him were, I will never, ever stop trying to tell your story. I will find a way. And so when I decided I'd try and publish it, that I'd print 100 copies myself and give them away to friends, and I would have, that promise I would have held. So this is what happened ultimately, of absolute shock. And I actually couldn't appreciate it because being down here in Australia, I had no idea what was happening in the UK. And the US was 9 months behind publishing. So there was just this thing going on in the UK. My publishers are writing me saying, this is incredible. This is a phenomenon you're creating here. And I go, okay, that's nice. Anyway, move on. Because I wasn't being at all touched by it down here until all of a sudden they went, no. This is actually, I can say bigger than Ben-Hur. Probably sold more copies than Ben-Hur.
I think Lale would have a huge smile on his face knowing the book has reached so many people.
Yeah. That was the 2 reasons, folks, that he wanted me to tell his story. 1, tell it so that the world knows about this girl whose arm I held while I stabbed numbers into her. This young girl who I've loved all my life. And you've got to know that before he went to Auschwitz, He was a playboy. He was a love him and leave him playboy. And the other reason was tell the world so that it never happens again. Sadly, we know that genocides have continued throughout this time. But if there's any part of this story of his and of all the other Auschwitz stories which have subsequently come out, can just have people think twice. Just remember what can go very, very wrong when you let people in power dictate.
Absolutely. Well, I think it was 3 months before his passing. He had asked you to take him back to Auschwitz. Is that?
Yeah. He had never left the country. He and Gita had got here because he was an escaped prisoner from Slovakia. He got back to Slovakia. They were leading a good life there. He got caught. He was sending money out of Slovakia to Israel because so many Holocaust survivors and people he knew had gone to Israel. And we're talking about, 47, 48.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very crucial time in Israel's formation. Well, it wasn't even Israel then, it was Palestine. He'd probably be charged as being a terrorist or something now, smuggling money to another country. Anyway, he got caught because for him, he'd said to me, he said, what else could I do to help the people in Israel create that state that we wanted there? So he was funding it. But yes, so he had to be escaped out of Slovakia. He was imprisoned, and Gita, she had to come to the fore, and she bribed a judge, a Catholic priest, and a psychiatrist, and persuaded the authorities for him to be given some weekend leave because he was going to go insane. He'd used the Catholic priest as a way to get to him and to tell him he had to go crazy. The first couple of times, Lale said, the prison guards came to him and said, oh, look, there's a Catholic priest here wanting to see you. And Slovakia is predominantly Catholic, so it wasn't a big deal. You let your prisoners see their priest. And he sent them away. What do I want with a Catholic priest? But the third time he went, no, whatever. He said, I like to talk to people. And it was in his so-called confession when the guard was out of his room that the priest said, your wife has sent me here. She's bribed a judge to get me here. And we want you to start acting like you're losing your mind. And we will have a psychiatrist now come and see you. And he will then be asking for some weekend leave. So this whole scenario played out over several months until finally he did get that weekend leave, but it was all planned that he and Gita were being smuggled out in the false wall of a truck into Austria.
Wow. So they never left Australia?
Well, Gita did. Yeah, Lale wouldn't. When they finally got to Vienna and then they went to Paris, they were there for several months. But even then, they then had to go and buy fraudulent passports. They didn't have passports. So they bought fraudulent papers and got on a boat and got to Australia. And yes, Lale never, ever left because he feared that he was an escaped prisoner, that the authorities worldwide would get him and take him back. But Gita just threw away her papers, told the Australian authorities, I'm a displaced person, I don't have papers. And so they gave her an Australian passport. And she went back to Slovakia several times to see Silka, who's the other story of mine, and two of her brothers who had been resistance and partisan fighters had survived. And she went to Israel several times, but no, Lale wouldn't leave.
And so he was going to go to Auschwitz, though.
Out of the blue, he said to me one night when I found him and he was upset. And I said, what's wrong? He said, I need you to do something for me. And I went, anything? I've not said no to you yet. He said, I want you to take me back to Auschwitz. And I just was shocked. And I said, don't you want Gary? And he said, no, I want you. He said, it has to be you. Only you know my story. So I said, well, why do you want to go back there? I have to ask you. And he said to me, asked me, had I been there? And I said, no. He said, there should be a concrete step, he said, leading down into crematoria 3. Do you know if it's still there? And I said, I have no idea. He said, well, hopefully it's still there. I said, why is that concrete step so important to you? He said, I have to go back there and I have to stand on that step and I have to look down into that horrible place and I have to say I'm sorry to the million people I couldn't save.
Mm.
He broke me absolutely. No matter how much I tried to say to him, no, honey, you don't get to apologize. You don't do that. For him, he had to. All of a sudden, it became all that he wanted to do. And so I then said, okay, we'll do it. We'll do it. I'll do it for you. When do you want to go? And he said, the 27th of January, I want to walk through the gates, which is, of course, the anniversary of the liberation of that place. And I remember my brain thinking, you don't want to go in summer? I thought, no. But yeah, so that's we were making plans, and I've got it in my notes, because I did make notes, folks. I made them when I got home, frantically writing them down. That it was August.
I bet frantically.
Yeah.
But you did go.
But again, Alan, I never went until 2018. I would not go there before the book was published. I needed to make sure that when I was writing about that place, I was describing it through Lale's eyes, not mine, seeing it 70 years later. So that was very deliberate that I didn't do that until, after the book was published. No one has criticized me. I've had some criticisms. Nobody has criticized me, though, for any of the descriptions of the placing of the camps and where he worked and where everything happened. That was so embedded in his memory that there's nothing there that can be challenged at all. He got it right. 70 years later.
What was that experience for you in 2018?
I went to Birkenau first. It was just the way that the tour that I was on. It was with March of the Living, which you might know something about, an annual pilgrimage of young Jewish youth who go there. And I was part of the Australian March of the Living team. And we went to Birkenau first. And from the minute I saw that arched entryway and the railway line running through it, I went numb. And I remember walking into it and walking through that gate and onto the tracks and looking around. And then I walked to the entire length of Birkenau and I stayed on the train tracks as far as they went. I was stepping from one to the other. And for me, it was a matter of, you can never walk in somebody else's footsteps. You can just be in the place that they were. But I knew that if I looked to the left, that should be the women's camp over there. Oh, okay, we should be coming up on where Block 9 was. Oh, this is where the Roma camp was, or the Gypsy camp was. And as I walked down those railway tracks, stumbling over the stones and it was...
There was a group of folks there waiting for you.
Oh, yeah.
What?
The reason I'm right now, this is very important to me because I'm going to be in Slovakia in about 2 or 3 weeks' time.
Oh, wow.
And I'm going to be back in Krumpaki and with those folks. A local man in Sydney contacted me when the book came out, and he said, look, I come from Krumpaki. Now, Krumpaki is a tiny little place in Slovakia. It's like a little, what I call a hamlet. You have to drive in it and drive out of it. Scenically stunning. The Tathra Mountains are its backdrop. It's got the babbling brook running through the town and the forested hills around. So idyllic, but it's very poor and always probably has been, so he came from, this man in Sydney came from Krumpaki, and he said, I've still got all my family back there and I've told them about you. So a few emails passed and they wanted me to go to Slovakia. Could I go there? And I said, I'm going in a few weeks to Poland. I'm going to be in Auschwitz-Birkenau, but I don't have time. I was doing a tour. I don't have time to go there, but I will. And I think I was probably a little bit dismissive or not. I think it wasn't important for me at that point to go to Lale's hometown. I was new to this. But we're on a bus and we were driving from Krakow into Auschwitz where the buses all park. And I just happened to look out the window, and here was a group of about 15 men and women and youth, and they're on the side of the road, and they're holding up a sign that says, Lale Sokolov, Krumpaki. I just was blown away, and they were outside the perimeter. And I got off the bus and I had to go and see these folks. And there were guards there. This was a really significant March of the Living. It was one of the anniversaries. And I think the president of Israel was there, the prime minister of Israel, the president of Poland, Security was just incredibly tight, as you can imagine. And the guys wouldn't say, well, if you go out, we can't let you back in. And so I just begged him, and in the end he relented. And yeah, I went over, and only one of them spoke English, Pali. And they told me that this town of Krumpaki, everybody had donated a little bit of money to hire a minibus. So many people in this town had wanted to make that journey to come and see me. They had a ballot, and they had ballots of men and women, and then broken down into the age groups as well. So there I had from 80-year-olds to 16-year-olds. Wow. So overwhelming. And yeah, I'm going to see them all again in about 3 weeks. I've seen them many other times, but in 3 weeks' time, I'll be back there with them.
It's incredible. You, Lale, while he was at Auschwitz, had a motto. Can you tell everybody what that motto is?
If you wake up in the morning, it's a good day. Make it one the best you can. If you've been lucky enough to wake up today, folks, it's a good day. It's quite simple, really, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, it's just like you said with your yes, and the other, I forgot what the other lesson is, but I'll remember. But yeah, what is Gary like?
He's very overwhelmed at the moment. He's actually going to be, this is not common knowledge, but yeah, anyway, when this comes out, it might be, he's actually going to be with me in Krumpaki in 3 weeks' time. He has never been back he's never been to his parents' hometowns.
Wow.
And so together with my contacts there, I'm actually an honorary Slovakian. I've got a citizenship and the key to Krumpaki. And I get greeted there every time I go there with school concerts and the mayor who feeds me so much liver bits, it's not good for my liver. But I'm taking him back there in 3 weeks' time, and he will get to see not only his dad's hometown, but also we're going to Runoff, where his mum came from. And I've also been there, of course, and with people that live there, we will be showing him where his parents lived, where the synagogues were. And the places up, he'll go into the school his dad went to, and he'll be able to walk down the corridor and into the classroom that his dad went to.
Oh, what a gift! Your friend who mentioned Gary's dad had a story.
Absolutely, and now this man, because he's this man in his early 60s, and yes, he's going to get to hear a bit more. And I just know that, given Gary is a very, very emotional man at the best of times, that this is going to be a very, very intensely emotional period for him and me.
Yeah, they're no longer with him, his parents, but learning all of this at this stage in life, I think, does make you more emotional.
Yeah. And I know the folks in Krumpaki, they are going to wrap him in one huge communal bear hug and not want to let him go. And one of the things I'm proud of, Alan, that in Krumpaki, the first time I went there, the mayor, who they love to walk you around the town. You can walk around the whole town. It's very small. And she took me to the spot right in the middle of the town, the small town. And she said, and it was all overgrown. It was just this weeds up to my neck, terrible state. And I didn't understand why we stopped there. And she said, this is where the synagogue was. It had stood there for decades. After the war, no Jews came back to our town. And so we left it. And then it started getting into ruins. And we had to pull it down eventually because it was just too dangerous and kids were going in. And I said, but what, you haven't done anything with it? In another situation, you'd say it's prime real estate sitting in the middle of the town.
Okay.
And she said, no, we can't. She said, because it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the Jews who never came back. Wow. There's not one person in Krumpaki who identifies as being Jewish today. Not one.
Wow. How many were there when Lale was there? Do you know?
Oh, probably 3,000 or 4,000.
Wow.
But these people just have got this piece of land and they weren't tendering it properly. I said, what can we do with it? Because there's something we can do. We need to preserve it. Can we use it? So what we ended up doing, and I funded it, but they used all their expertise, and that whole block of land has been turned into a public garden. And from all four corners, the Star of David has been marked out in beautiful paving, and there's seating and trees now growing. And in the middle of it, there's a marble plinth been put in the middle of the
If
Star
you have
of
a
David.
photo, please email it to me. I would love to see
I
that.
will.
I would love to
and
see that.
Rising from the plinth, one of the local men chopped down a couple of small trees, and they got two big logs of the tree, and he carved arms from the elbow up, and he carved them up to the fingers, and he entwined the fingers, and then he's got Lale and Gita's numbers burnt into the arms. And other than a memorial in Bratislava, I'm told it's the only other Holocaust memorial in all of Slovakia. It's in this tiny little town.
What a beautiful gift you helped.
Look, it was a privilege to be part of that. But for the most part, of course, mine was funny because we got a landscape designer. They did it properly. We got a landscape designer came from Bratislava to make sure that it was all designed properly and that the right plants, etc. So, yes, I'll send you a photo of them.
Wow.
Second only memorial in Slovakia.
How did meeting Lale change your life?
Absolutely, he made me a better person. He made me more aware of the privileged life that I had, being born and brought up down under here, where we have never been touched by any kind of external violence. And he made me aware of the need to make sure that I not only told my children, but that I told as many people as I could of this other evil part of history that I had no part in, but millions of others did. And the wonderful thing about in some ways, not being Jewish, and I'm so humbled by how the Jewish communities around the world have accepted me. Utterly overwhelming. And for them, they've told me many, many times that I have the ability, seems I have the ability to reach non-Jewish people with these stories by not being Jewish. Because I'm not trying to ram anything down anybody's throats. I'm just trying to tell these beautiful stories of these ordinary people who lived through extraordinary times and those around them who survived or didn't.
Well said. You speak at a lot of Holocaust conferences, don't you?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Are you asked, is there a question that always comes up? Something that
specifically in synagogues and Holocaust centers?
No, just when you're talking about the stories, something people want to know.
The interesting thing is that, particularly when you're talking to Jewish communities, and I've spoken in the London synagogue. There's a synagogue in Sydney here that wants me back every other week if I would go, and invite me not only to be on Friday night at the Shabbat, but to stay in the synagogue and speak to the men after the women have left. This is how welcoming they've been, and it's like they know the story of the Holocaust. These folks. They want to hear the story about just Lale as a man. Tell me about him. What was it about him? And I said, he would say to you that he is just like you, an ordinary man. And I said, you all have stories, don't you? And they go, yeah, absolutely, we do. You do.
Yeah.
Let's get them out there. And so many of them also sing the praises, by the way, of Steven Spielberg. And what he did after he made Schindler's List and creating the Shoah Foundation. And again, for anyone there who is not aware of the Shoah Foundation, and I think he's got some 40 or 50,000 tapes.
I mean, I'm grateful. My parents didn't speak much about their experience, and my sister and I were able to convince them to record their stories, even though they did it with difficulty. And,
yes.
And because it wasn't sort of, the depth that you had with Lale, just being able to sit, they brought a camera. You know,
Yeah.
it makes it a little more difficult than how you were able to get Lale to open his heart to you. You know, you could tell both of my parents, you know, it was difficult to speak, I think. I mean, because of this story, but I think also because there's a camera there. It's
With the
not.
circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a one-off with the stranger.
Right. Totally.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, Lale and Gita had made show tapes too. Well, Lale always wanted to, and he did when they sent those videographers came to Melbourne. Gita didn't want to, he said. He had to bully her into doing it because he said, they need to hear your story. And he willingly made his. And she agreed to do it in the end, but on two conditions: that he had to leave the house when they came into their house and filmed them there, and that he was never allowed to watch it. And he never did. He gave it to me to watch, but he never did.
Well, I will tell you that I have interviewed a cousin of mine who's in her 90s, who is a survivor. I'm not allowed to air it until she dies because she is still too scared of the world around us.
Yes. And look, I get that. But like you said, when we look at Lale's tape, even though he willingly made it, he answers the questions with 3 or 4 words. It's like he gives out more facts and there's very little emotion in there. There's no, and I think I suspect if Spielberg did it again, maybe the people doing the interviewing may be a little bit more trained to, when you hear an answer, follow up on it. Because I've watched many show tapes. That's the reality, and grateful for them. Don't get me wrong. Sorry, Stephen, I'm not in any way discrediting what you did. But there were several times many times, the interviewer asked a question and the answer was given. And oh my gosh, you just know there's so much more there. There's no follow-up. It's like they were ticking boxes on a checklist. Okay.
The lesson, like you said, of saying yes, and Lale's motto thing I've learned even from this show is, Gary having the opportunity to sit with his parents and ask them questions. Like anybody watching this today, if you have grandparents, no matter what your story, no matter what your religion, no matter what your, taught, you can learn so much about your family if you just, ask the questions and then listen.
And see, Gary didn't do that. He never had that chance. And I think even if he had tried, they probably would have said no.
It's possible.
Here's a tip I give to people who say, I've got a grandmother, I've got a great aunt, and I just know that there's something in her past that there's a lot to be told about. And my advice to them is always, when next time you're visiting them alone, you don't want people around, have a look on their walls, have a look on their mantelpiece, find an object there. I said, it's there for a reason because it means something to them. I said, it's a matter of just simply picking it up and saying, hey, Grandma, what can you tell me about this highlighter? Do you remember where you were when you bought it? Who was with you?
I love that.
You ask a few simple questions and then they have permission now to talk. And I've heard that's worked for many people.
I think it's a great idea. Great idea. You've written other books that have come from Lale's story. Will you tell people what those are?
Yes, Silka, beautiful Silka. Lale said to me so many times that I couldn't count. After you've told my story, and then he'd wag his finger and grin and go, only after you've told mine.
me first.
Me first. You must tell the world about Silka. She was the bravest person. And then he'd wag his finger again and go, not the bravest girl, the bravest person I ever knew. And the world deserves to know about Silka. This 16-year-old girl taken into Birkenau, I think the second transport of Slovakian. The Slovakian girls, by the way, were the first Jewish people taken into Auschwitz-Birkenau. The first Slovakian girls sold by the Slovakian government. And Silka, went there in late March 1942. Lale was about 2 weeks later. But the commandant of Birkenau, she caught his eye. And the only way to describe it, folks, is she survived those nearly 3 years by being his sex slave, being there for him. This is not something which has been allowed to be spoken about, that there was, in fact, sexual assault and rape being taking place in that place between the Jewish girls and the SS. Absolutely it did. And for anyone to think that it didn't is very, very naive. But she survived. And when Auschwitz was liberated by the Russians, a couple of the women there pointed the finger at her and said, she slept with the enemy. She was in charge with being a collaborator because she chose to live by being raped. And she was sent to a gulag in Siberia for 10 years. Wow. She survived that. And she got back to Slovakia with the man that she met in that gulag, a Czech, who also had been there purely because he'd been a lawyer, and Stalin didn't like lawyers. Yes, and so they married when they both got back to Czechoslovakia, and they lived for the next 50 years in Košice. And her incredible story of survival of two of history's most evil periods is phenomenal. And I never got to meet Silka. I read many of her letters to Gita that Lale translated for me because they're always written in Slovakian. I read many testimonies about her. I then travelled several times into Košice and sat in the apartment next to the one that she and her husband had lived in with these elderly couple well into their 90s who had known them for decades. As neighbours and friends came in over days and days and shared with me their stories of this beautiful woman who no one, not Hitler, not Stalin, could take away her beauty and her love for life. Never had any of her children of her own. She was so cruelly bastardized during those periods, but she was the mother to so many. It's Silka's story. And I'm very proud to tell that, because it does shine a light on the sexual abuse and the rape of women during conflict and wars.
Well, and that's, when you think of what happened on October 7th in Israel.
Yeah.
What was your reaction, when you first heard that?
I was in London and I got a message. My third book, Three Sisters, one of those sisters is still alive. She's 98, living in Tel Aviv. Of course, what's going on here. I'm very, very close. They're called my Israeli family. So the three sisters, of course, their children and their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren I just give cuddles to and take, koala bears to. But there's 4 generations of who are now my family in Israel. And I got a message from Libby. She's the sister still alive. I got a message from her daughter very soon after the attack had happened. Before I'm in London, nothing on the BBC, nothing on the news. And I was hearing it direct from Israel before it was even making the news. And I'm writing back to Dorrit saying, it can't be that bad. She's saying, she said, there are hundreds. She said, over thousands of people have been taken and have been killed. And so I got her on the phone. I said, Dorrit, what the hell's going on? And so it was weird. I'm hearing something from someone who's on the ground while it's happening. And I'm in my hotel room. I've got the BBC News on. I've got CNN on. And I couldn't fathom it because surely, Dorrit, I'd be hearing about this on the news. But no, it was too early. Shocked for days, and contact with them several times a day for days and weeks, and of course, still am. Look, it's a really, really complex situation, as you know. I have these family in Israel who, and look, I don't think they'd mind if my saying on their behalf that, in fact, that really what they want right now is for, besides things to go back to normal if they ever can, but they want their prime minister gone.
Yes,
and they lay all this firmly at the feet of Netanyahu, and yes, it's
and get those hostages home.
Yeah,
I mean, just hearing you say you have family in Israel now, I mean, this all started with the introduction to Lale.
It did, and look, I'll be brief, but how I have family in Israel and where that story came from. I was in South Africa at a book festival there. It was a lovely little town called Franschhoek, just out of Cape Town. It happens to be the wine region too, folks. If ever you go to South Africa and you like good wine, Franschhoek. And I got back to my hotel room sort of early hours one morning, and there was an email there from a man, and he wrote saying that he lives in Toronto, in Canada, and he had picked up the tattooist at Toronto Airport on his way to visit his mum in Israel. Now, Canada have a different cover to what you have. They have the Australian cover. It's just that's not that one.
What's this one? That's
the American.
Okay.
The Canadian and the Australian cover, it's a black background. There's two arms from the elbow down just coming together into hands with the numbers of Bloody and Gita clearly visible on those two arms. That's all, black cover, two arms. And he wrote saying that he'd picked up the book, he was reading it on his way to Israel. And that morning he'd come out to finish reading it, and he left it on his coffee table at his mum's home. And his mum had walked past and said, "That must be about Lale and Gita." And he said, "How could you know that?" And he said, "Look at the number on that girl's arm. Now look at the number on mine. They're 3 apart. That's Gita's. Your Auntie Sibby's was 2 away from Gita's."
Oh.
We went to school with Gita. We were on the train going to Auschwitz with Gita. We were in block 29 with Gita. Lale made our numbers.
Oh.
Well, you read that, no matter what the time of the night.
Oop. Oh, I just lost Heather. I hope she comes back so I can thank her for doing this. I am so sorry. Let's see what happens. Hopefully she will be back. Oh, there she is. Good. There you are.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, it's the internet. That happens.
It does.
That is an incredible story.
Look, it is. And he gave me a phone number, and he said that his mum wanted to talk to me. So a couple of days later, I rang her. I think I might have made it to Cape Town by this stage. And I had this beautiful, she would have been 93, 94 at that stage on the phone. And we said hello, and she said, "There's so much I want to tell you about Lale and Gita." And I said, "There's so much I'd like to hear from you." And she said, "I don't like talking on the telephone. You'll have to come and see me." I said, "Well, I'm currently in South Africa. I live in Australia, and you're in Israel." And I went, "You're right, let me get back to you." So I contacted my publishers, and I went, "Look, I think I need to go to Israel." And Kate said, "Okay, yep, we accept that." I said, "I've got to go up to Johannesburg. I've got some work up there for a couple of days." And she said, "Okay, get yourself up there." But 3 days later, I flew from Johannesburg straight to Tel Aviv and into the lives of the Mella sisters. There was no go home, collect $200. And from that point in time, yes, I am now part of the Mella family, and they are part of my...
I mean, the fact that he reached out to you, he had no idea reading the book.
No, and he had no idea that I would read the email, because there's lots of emails come through. And
right, absolutely. Here's the, I think the hands.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. See, 4562.
Wow. Yeah. Before I let you go, what do you miss most about Lale and your time with him?
His schoolgirl giggle. Yeah, once he got through that period where he didn't want to go out, he didn't reconnect with the Jewish community for some 6 months. As we were talking, and as I saw him unloading, and I could see that talking to me was becoming cathartic for him. And then after a while, he did say to me one day, "Would I go out with him?" And I went, "Sure." He said, "There's a thing on I think it was next Sunday. Can you come? It's at the Holocaust Centre here. It's a big social. And would you come?" So I did. And I walked into this room. There would be 200 or 300 people in this room, mostly, a lot of them elderly Holocaust survivors themselves. And we were the last to go in, because he would not let us go in until he was sure everybody was there. We sat in the car watching. Until finally he saw this woman go in. He said, she's gone in. We can now go in. She's always the last, but not today. Oh, you're a cheeky bugger. And so we walked into this room and everyone turned around and just looked at it and started squealing out his name. And Laddie's back. And he stood there beaming and he looked at everybody and went, she my girlfriend. Ladies, you look after her. I pick her up on the way out. And sent me over. And from that point on in time, I became his girlfriend. And if he wanted me to go out somewhere, he was always a gentleman. He would ring my husband and say, "May I take her out, please?" So they had a running joke that I may be Steve's wife, but I was his girlfriend.
Oh my God.
And at that point, I got Laddie back. I got the giggling, laughing, full of life. He now wanted to live. No more did he say those words he greeted me with every day I went there of, hurry up and tell my story. I need to be with Gita. He stopped saying that. And to his credit, Gary says to me, you gave me 3 years with my dad that I never thought I'd have, because he told his son that he wasn't going to stay around. What do I miss? I miss that charm, that cheeky, and that schoolgirl giggle.
I mean, Heather, thank you so much for telling this story and for doing this from Australia with me. I'm going to read the book. I'm going to read all the books.
You've seen the miniseries. You don't need to, darling.
Yeah. And I'm so glad, because a friend had just seen it and reminded me about, the story. And just thank you. Keep doing what you're doing,
Alan, my absolute honor and pleasure to be talking to you. Thank you for this invitation.
You have a great day, because I know it's early for you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, guys.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in tonight. Please, if you have not read The Tattooist of Auschwitz or seen the miniseries, please do yourself a favor and me a favor and do so. As I leave you tonight, remember, we all have choices to make in life. Speak up, do the hard thing, and let's all fight hate for good. I truly believe conversations like this can change the world around us. Feel free to share these episodes with your friends and family. And until the next conversation, please stay safe.